Wait, please don't let him fall. The waitress lunges forward as the billionaire freezes beside his son's wheelchair, helpless in the narrow diner aisle. In one swift motion, she lifts the boy into her arms like it's the most natural thing in the world. Around them, conversations stop. Coffee cups hover mid-air. Adrian Ashford, CEO, empire builder, destroyer of companies, can buy hospitals, scientists, entire skyscrapers. But in this moment, he cannot even carry his own child. What he doesn't realize yet is that the quiet woman walking toward the restroom with his son is about to break the most expensive wall he has ever built, his own heart. The name Adrian Ashford was a brand, a Titan stamp on the steel and glass heart of Manhattan. As CEO of Ashford Holdings, a sprawling global conglomerate with tentacles in tech, real estate, and private equity. His days were a meticulously orchestrated symphony of power. He moved through a world of muted colors. The charcoal gray of his brown suits, the polished obsidian of his Maybach's interior, the cool slate of his penthouse office overlooking Central Park. His world was one of numbers of acquisitions and hostile takeovers of human beings reduced to assets or liabilities on a balance sheet. And in this stark, unforgiving ledger, his own son was a debt he could never repay. Leo was 10 years old, a boy, with his mother's bright, intelligent eyes and a mind as sharp as the city skyline outside his window. He also had spinal muscular atrophy, a cruel twist of genetic fate that had stolen the strength from his limbs, confining him to a state-of-the-art power wheelchair that cost more than most people's cars. The chair was a perfect metaphor for Adrian's approach to fatherhood. He threw money at the problem, hoping the best technology, the most qualified specialists, and the most expensive caregivers would somehow fill the chasm that had opened between them. The chasm had been carved the day his wife, Elena, had died. It was a complication during a routine procedure, a 1 in a million statistical anomaly that Adrian, a man who controlled every variable, could not prevent. In his grief, he sealed himself off, treating his sorrow like a hostile company to be dismantled and liquidated. He channeled his energy into the only thing he felt he could still control, his empire. In doing so, he left his grieving son to navigate the wreckage alone. Their relationship was a series of sterile, scheduled interactions. A brief, "How was your session, Leo?" As Adrian strode past his attention already on the murmuring Bluetooth device in his ear, a shared dinner in the cavernous dining room, the silence broken only by the clinking of silverware against porcelain, a highly paid nanny hovering nearby to attend to Leo's physical needs. Adrian loved his son, or so he told himself. It was a theoretical love, an acknowledged fact, like the value of a stock. But the daily hands-on reality of that love, the patience, the empathy, the simple act of being present, was a language he no longer spoke. He saw Leo's wheelchair, his physical limitations, and saw a reflection of his own powerlessness. It was a failure, a flaw in the perfect Ashford legacy, and it nared at him with a quiet, persistent shame. He hired an endless rotation of caregivers, each with impeccable credentials and glowing recommendations. They were competent, professional, and utterly detached. They managed Leo's schedule, his medications, his therapies. But none of them saw the boy who dreamed of exploring ancient ruins or the budding artist who sketched fantastical creatures in a notebook he kept hidden under his mattress. They saw the disability, the job description, the paycheck, and Adrian in his gilded cage saw nothing else either. On a bleak Tuesday afternoon, the sky weeping a miserable grey drizzle over the city, Adrian was in the final stages of closing the landmark acquisition of a rival tech firm, Sterling Moss. The deal was worth billions. It was aggressive, brutal, and would cement his legacy as the undisputed king of the industry. His phone buzzed incessantly with updates from his legal team. He was a predator closing in on a kill. In the living area of the penthouse, a space so large and sparsely decorated, it felt more like a modern art gallery than a home Leo was with his current caregiver. A stern woman named Ms. Albright. She had been with them for 2 months, a new record. She was efficient, but her patience was as thin as a microchip. "Leo, it's time for your physical therapy." she announced, her voice devoid of warmth. Leo was engrossed in a documentary about deep-sea exploration on the massive 8K television. "Can we watch for 5 more minutes? They're about to show the giant squid." "The schedule is the schedule," Ms. Albright replied, tapping her foot. "Your father insists on adherence to the schedule." The mention of his father made Leo flinch. His father's schedule was a holy text, an unchangeable law of their universe. Defeated, he clicked the TV off with his remote. As Ms. Albright began the cumbersome process of maneuvering his chair towards the therapy room, Adrian strode into the living area, his jaw tight with the thrill of the corporate hunt. "Though just called," Adrian said, not to Leo, but into his phone. "Tell the board at Sterling Moss their counteroffer is an insult. We proceed as planned. No prisoners." He snapped his phone shut, and his gaze fell upon his son. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. Adrian saw the familiar flicker of disappointment in Leo's face, the longing for a connection that was perpetually just out of reach. It pricked at Adrian's conscience, a dull ache. He immediately suppressed. "Everything on track, Miss Albright?" he asked, his voice crisp and dismissive. "Yes, Mr. Ashford. We were just proceeding to therapy." "Excellent." He was already turning away his mind back on share prices and legal loopholes. He had a kingdom to run. He didn't have time for giant squids or the silent, lonely depths of his own son's eyes. He didn't realize that the foundations of his kingdom and the very definition of his wealth were about to be shaken by a force he could never have anticipated in a place he would never have chosen to be. The storm wasn't just outside. It was gathering force within the cold, sterile walls of his perfect life. The universe has a funny way of disrupting the meticulously planned lives of powerful men. Adrian Ashford's disruption came in the form of a flat tire on the West Side Highway during a torrential downpour. His driver, a man named George who had been with him for a decade, was mortified. The Maybach, a fortress on wheels, was temporarily crippled. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Ashford. The run flat is, well, it's not running flat. It's completely shredded road debris. I've called for a replacement vehicle, but in this weather, it could be an hour." An hour. To Adrian, an hour was an eternity. It was 60 minutes of lost productivity, a gap in the armor of his efficiency. He was supposed to be at a celebratory dinner with his legal team at Pire. Instead, he was stranded, and he wasn't alone. Leo was in the back seat, having just finished a draining neurology appointment across town. "The replacement car will meet us somewhere," Adrian snapped, peering through the rain-streaked window. The traffic was a snarling beast. "We can't just sit here, find a place, a restaurant, anything." George, flustered, scanned the street. They were in a part of Hell's Kitchen that hadn't yet been fully sanitized by gentrification. It was a gritty street of old brick tenements, laundromats, and small family-run businesses. "There's a place, sir," George said hesitantly. "A diner? It's called the Daily Grind." Adrian recoiled internally. A diner, greasy spoons were for people in movies, for a life he had long since shed. But the rain was relentless, and Leo was starting to look pale and tired. "Fine," Adrian bit out. "Let's go." The moment they entered the Daily Grind, they were assaulted by a world alien to Adrian Ashford. The air was thick with the smell of frying bacon, hot coffee, and damp wool. The lighting was a warm, yellowy white, a stark contrast to the cold blue LEDs of his office. The place was bustling with the controlled chaos of a neighborhood institution. Construction workers shaking off the rain, students hunched over laptops, and elderly couples sharing a piece of pie. It was loud, it was real, and Adrian hated it instantly. He steered Leo's chair towards a booth in the corner, feeling the curious stars of the other patrons. A man like Adrian Ashford in a suit that cost more than their monthly rent with a disabled child in a high-tech wheelchair was an anomaly. He felt exposed, stripped of his usual power. A waitress approached their table. She looked to be in her late 20s, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her uniform was standard issue, but clean. Her shoes, however, were worn, the soles smoothed down from countless hours on her feet, but it was her eyes that caught Adrian's attention. They were a deep, compassionate brown, and despite the weary lines around them, They held a genuine warmth. "Hi there," she said, her voice soft but clear over the diner's den. Her gaze went directly to Leo, not to the imposing figure of his father. "Tough day to be out and about?" "What can I get for you two to warm you up?" "Just coffee black," Adrian said curtly. "And for you?" "Hon," she asked Leo, crouching slightly to be at his eye level. "We've got the best hot chocolate in Manhattan. Comes with a mountain of whipped cream." Leo, who was usually shy and withdrawn around strangers, looked up. He saw that she was speaking to him, the person, not the chair. A small, hesitant smile touched his lips. "Okay with the mountain, please." "One mountainous hot chocolate coming right up," she said with a wink before turning back to Adrian. "My name's Amelia, by the way. Just give a yell if you need anything." Adrian just nodded, already pulling out his phone to check stock tickers. He ignored the hot chocolate when it arrived, a magnificent concoction of dark liquid and snowy cream. He ignored the way Leo's eyes lit up. He was absorbed in his world, a world away from this cheap, noisy diner. After a few minutes, Leo finished his drink. "Dad, I need to use the restroom," he said quietly. Adrian's head snapped up. This was always the most difficult part of any unplanned outing. He scanned the diner. He saw the narrow hallway, the old wooden door with a simple male silhouette. There was no way the wheelchair would fit. "Ms. Albright usually handles this," Adrian said, a note of helpless frustration in his voice. He felt a flush of anger at the situation at the diner, at his own inability to handle this simple human need. "I can't hold it." Leo whispered, his face tight with anxiety and embarrassment. The exchange did not go unnoticed. Amelia, who was clearing a nearby table, saw the predicament instantly. She had seen this scenario play out before with other customers. The awkwardness, the stress on the family's face before Adrian could begin the humiliating process of trying to figure out the logistics of creating a scene. Amelia was at their table. "The hallway is too tight, isn't it?" she said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact, robbing the situation of its drama. She looked at Adrian, then at Leo. "Hon, is it okay if I help you? I'm stronger than I look." Leo looked at his father, then back at Amelia. He saw no pity in her eyes, only practical kindness. He gave a small, uncertain nod. Adrian was about to protest, to say it was inappropriate to offer her money, to just not. But he didn't know what the alternative was. He was frozen, a titan of industry, rendered completely useless. Amelia didn't wait for his permission. She knelt beside Leo's chair. "Okay, here's the plan," she said to him, as if they were co-conspirators. "I'm going to put my arms right here, and you're going to lean against me just like a sack of potatoes. It's a short flight, and I'll have you there and back before your dad finishes his coffee." Her movements were confident and sure. She positioned herself, took Leo's slight weight, and with a grunt of effort that was both real and completely unself-conscious, she lifted him from his chair. She held him securely, his head resting against her shoulder. She carried him the 15 feet to the restroom, her worn shoes steady on the linoleum floor. The diner for a moment seemed to go quiet in Adrian's ears. The clatter of plates, the murmur of conversation, the hiss of the coffee machine, it all faded into a dull roar. All he could see was this stranger, this waitress, holding his son. He had seen a dozen nurses and caregivers lift Leo. It was always a clinical, detached procedure, a task to be completed. But this was different. This wasn't a task. It was an act of uncomplicated, unhesitating human decency. She wasn't paid an exorbitant salary. She had no obligation. She simply saw a need and met it with grace and dignity. He watched as she brought Leo back a few minutes later, settling him gently into his chair, making sure he was comfortable. She gave Leo's shoulder a small, reassuring squeeze. "All good?" she asked. Leo nodded, his cheeks slightly pink, but his eyes were shining with a relief that was more than just physical. It was the relief of being treated with respect. Amelia turned to Adrian. "Anything else I can get for you?" Adrian stared at her. The words caught in his throat. He, a master of negotiation and command, was speechless. The numbers on his phone screen seemed meaningless. The multi-billion-dollar deal, a distant, trivial game. In that moment, watching this woman carry his son a hairline fracture appeared in the frozen tundra of his heart. It was a crack so fine he barely registered it, but through it, something warm and utterly foreign was beginning to seep in. He had made 1,000 decisions that day based on profit and loss. Now, watching this waitress wipe down his table, he was about to make a decision that had nothing to do with money and would end up changing everything. The drive back to the penthouse in the sleek replacement Escalade that had finally arrived was silent. The rain had subsided to a persistent drizzle, mirroring the turmoil in Adrian Ashford's mind. He kept replaying the scene in the diner, the worn-out shoes, the easy smile, the effortless way Amelia had lifted his son, not just physically, but emotionally. When they arrived, the current caregiver, Ms. Albright, was waiting in the lobby, her face a mask of disapproval. "You are 2 hours behind schedule, Mr. Ashford. The therapeutic regimen is precise for a reason." The old Adrian would have apologized, perhaps offered a bonus to smooth things over. The new Adrian, the one with the hairline crack in his heart, looked at her cold professional face and saw everything that was wrong with his life. He saw a paid service, not care. He saw adherence to a schedule, not attention to a child. "Pack your things, Miss Albright," Adrian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your service is no longer required. A severance check will be couriered to you in the morning." Ms. Albright was stunned into silence. Leo's eyes widened. Adrian didn't offer any further explanation. He simply wheeled Leo into the elevator, his mind already working, calculating. But this time, the variables were different. They weren't share prices. They were kindness, dignity, and a mountainous hot chocolate. His first impulse was transactional. Find the waitress. Offer her an obscene amount of money to be Leo's caregiver. Problem solved. He would acquire her just like he was acquiring sterling moss. But as he sat in his slate-grey office that night, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of scattered diamonds, he hesitated. It felt too easy too. Transactional. It was his old way of thinking, the very thinking that had led him to this sterile existence. Who was Amelia? In his world, everyone had an angle. Kindness was a currency, a means to an end. People were nice to Adrian Ashford because he was Adrian Ashford. They wanted his money, his influence, his power. This woman had wanted nothing. She didn't even know who he was. The purity of it baffled him. It was an anomaly in his data set, and he needed to understand it. The next morning, he made a call not to his head of HR, but to a man named David Thompson. Thompson was a discreet silver-haired man who ran a private investigation firm that catered to the city's elite. They were the ones who did the deep-dive background checks on high-level corporate appointments, vetted potential spouses, and made inconvenient problems disappear. David Adrian said, his voice crisp, "I have a delicate matter. I need a comprehensive but completely invisible background profile on an individual. Her name is Amelia Vance. She works as a waitress at a diner called The Daily Grind in Hell's Kitchen." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. Thompson was used to digging up dirt, finding leverage, uncovering secrets. Understood, Adrian. What kind of information are we looking for? Financial exposure, undisclosed associations, everything, Adrian said. But that's not what I'm looking for. I don't want dirt, David. I want to know who she is. I want to know what makes a person like that tick. I want to know if she's real. It was the strangest request Thompson had ever received from the ruthless billionaire. But he simply replied, "I'll get right on it. You'll have the preliminary report within 48 hours." For the next 2 days, Adrian felt a strange sense of anticipation. He managed Leo's care himself, a clumsy, awkward dance that left him both exhausted and strangely fulfilled. He learned that Leo hated the texture of steamed carrots, that he had a wicked sense of humor, and that his sketches of mythical creatures were astonishingly detailed. He was seeing his son for the first time, and the sight was both wonderful and deeply shaming. On Thursday afternoon, the encrypted file from Thompson arrived. Adrian opened it, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar mix of hope and cynicism. He expected to find something, a hidden debt, a disgruntled ex-boyfriend, a minor brush with the law, something to confirm his worldview that everyone had a price of flaw. The report was meticulously detailed. Subject Amelia Vance, age 28. Residence a fourth-floor walk-up in a pre-war building in Washington Heights. Rent was consistently paid on time, but records showed 2 late payments in the last year. Financials, multiple sources of debt. The bulk of it was medical debt inherited after the deaths of both her parents from cancer 2 years prior. She was paying it off in small, dogged monthly installments. There was also a student loan for a community college degree in social work, which she had been forced to abandon halfway through to care for her ailing mother. Her bank account balance was 412 vantals and 37 tons. Employment history, a string of service industry jobs. Flawless record, no disciplinary actions. Co-workers interviewed discreetly described her as reliable, hardworking, and someone who always picked up extra shifts for others. Personal associations. A younger sister, Chloe Vance, currently a sophomore at SUNY Albany studying nursing. Social media analysis showed frequent loving communication. Financial records indicated Amelia sent her sister $200 every month without fail. Charitable activities volunteered twice a month at the Second Chance Animal Shelter in the Bronx. She was known as the cat whisperer criminal record nun, not even a parking ticket. Adrian read the report, and then he read it again. He scrolled through the discreetly obtained photos. Amelia laughing with her sister on a video call. Amelia patiently coaxing a terrified kitten out from under a cage at the shelter. Amelia leaving her apartment at dawn. A look of grim determination on her face. There was no dirt. There was no angle. There was no hidden agenda. The report painted a picture not of a secret schemer, but of a young woman burdened by responsibility and loss, who faced her struggles not with bitterness, but with a quiet, unrelenting grace. She sent money to her sister when her own bank account was nearly empty. She comforted abandoned animals in her spare time. She was paying off the debts of the parents she had lost, honoring their memory with every dollar she earned. The cynicism in Adrian's heart, the hard-won armor of a lifetime of betrayal and calculation, didn't just crack, it shattered. He felt a profound sense of shame. He lived in a palace commanding billions, and his life was empty. This woman lived in a tiny apartment burdened by debt, and her life was rich with love, loyalty, and purpose. His initial decision had been to buy her help. Now he knew that wasn't enough. He wasn't just going to offer her a job. He was going to offer her a lifeline. But more than that, he realized with a startling clarity that he was the one who needed help. He had thought he was investigating her to see if she was worthy of entering his world. The truth was, he needed to find out if he was worthy of entering hers. The acquisition of Amelia Vance was off the table. The petition for a partnership had begun. Adrian Ashford did not send an emissary. He did not summon Amelia Vance to his intimidating office. The following afternoon, he drove himself, a rare occurrence, back to Hell's Kitchen. He parked the Bentley, a shimmering black behemoth, a block away from the daily grind, feeling self-conscious of its opulence. He walked into the diner, the bell above the door chiming his arrival, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt nervous. Amelia was rushing between tables, a pot of coffee in each hand. She saw him, and her professional smile clicked into place, though a flicker of recognition and perhaps surprise crossed her face. "Back again?" she said warmly. "Did you leave something behind?" "Yes," Adrian said, his voice softer than he intended. "I think I did." He waited until she had a moment's peace, then motioned to the same corner booth. "Miss Vance Amelia, may I have a moment of your time? It's important." Her brow furrowed with curiosity, but she nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "I've got 5 minutes before the dinner rush hits." "What's on your mind?" Adrian didn't know where to begin. The carefully rehearsed speech he had prepared vanished from his mind. So he started with the truth. "My son Leo." He began. "I haven't seen him smile the way he smiled after you helped him the other day in a very long time. What you did, it wasn't just about getting him to the restroom. You saw him, Most people don't. Amelia listened, her expression unreadable. He seems like a great kid, very bright. He is, Adrian said, a genuine warmth in his voice. The reason I'm here is I recently had to let his caregiver go. I'm looking for someone new, someone different. I'm looking for you. Amelia blinked. Me? I'm a waitress. I'm not a registered nurse or a therapist. I have nurses and therapists, Adrian countered quickly. I have a whole medical team. That's not what Leo needs. He needs a friend. He needs what you gave him for free the other day. Kindness, respect normally. I want to offer you the position of Leo's full-time companion and caregiver. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a formal offer, drafted by his lawyers. He named a salary that was 10 times what she currently made in a year. He included clauses about paying off all her outstanding debts, medical and student, within 24 hours of her acceptance. He offered a furnished apartment in his own building, health insurance, a generous pension. It was a king's ransom, an offer designed to be irresistible. Amelia looked at the paper, her eyes scanning the astronomical numbers. Adrian expected chocolation tears of joy. He expected immediate acceptance. Instead, she slowly folded the paper and pushed it back across the table towards him. "Mr. Ashford," she said, her voice steady and quiet. It's an incredible amount of money. But you're right. I'm not a nurse, so let me ask you some questions you don't have listed on this paper. What does Leo like to do for fun? What's his favorite book? Is he allergic to anything? What's his biggest fear? Who tucks him in at night? Adrian was floored. The questions were so simple, so fundamental, and he found himself fumbling for the answers. He knew the therapy schedule, the medication dosages, but the intimate details of his son's life, he had outsourced them. Amelia's gaze was not accusatory. It was searching. "I appreciate this offer more than you can imagine," she continued. "It would change my life. But I can't work for this piece of paper, and I can't work for you. I would only work for him. And if I take this job, my first condition is that you answer all those questions by the end of the week. Not by asking your staff, but by asking him yourself." It was the most brilliant, unexpected counteroffer Adrienne had ever received. She wasn't negotiating for more money or better perks. She was negotiating for him to be a better father. Humbled and strangely exhilarated, Adrian agreed. Done. Amelia's arrival at the Ashford penthouse was like opening a window in a mausoleum. She filled the sterile, silent spaces with life. She discovered Leo's hidden sketchbooks and praised his talent, buying him a professional set of artist's pencils. They baked cookies in the state-of-the-art kitchen that had previously only been used by caterers, filling the air with the scent of chocolate and vanilla. She talked to Leo about his deep-sea documentaries and then found a virtual reality experience that allowed him to explore the Mariana Trench from his living room. Laughter, a sound as foreign as birdsong in that apartment, became a daily occurrence. Adrian, true to his word, began to learn the answers to Amelia's questions. He came home from work earlier, his excuse being that he needed to supervise the transition. In reality, he found himself drawn to the warmth that now emanated from his own home. He would stand in the doorway of the living room unseen and watch Amelia and Leo build elaborate Lego castles, their heads bent together in concentration. He saw his son blossoming under her care, his shyness receding, replaced by a confident, happy boy. And as he watched, a dangerous and unfamiliar emotion began to stir within him. It wasn't just gratitude. He was drawn to Amelia's resilience, her effortless compassion, her quiet strength. He found himself noticing the way she would bite her lip when she was concentrating, the easy grace in her movements, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed. He started to feel a pang of something sharp and unwelcome when he saw her giving all her attention to Leo. It was jealousy, a ridiculous, unfounded jealousy of his own son. This internal conflict was the first twist, a complication he hadn't foreseen. He had hired her to fix a problem with his son, but she was systematically exposing the broken parts of himself. His decision to bring her into their lives was no longer a simple solution. It was becoming a profound and personal challenge. The second twist arrived in the form of his sister, Caroline Ashford Davenport. Caroline was a woman who had built her entire identity around being Adrian's sister. She lived off a generous trust fund. He managed her life a whirlwind of charity galas, European shopping trips, and social climbing. She saw the Ashford family name not as a legacy of industry, but as a lifetime pass to luxury. She arrived at the penthouse unannounced one afternoon, dripping in diamonds and smelling of Chanel No. 5. She found Adrian on the floor, the billion-dollar CEO, in his bespoke suit trousers, helping Leo and Amelia finish their Lego castle. "Adrian, what on earth are you doing on the floor?" "You'll ruin your suit," she said, her voice a high-pitched knife. Her eyes swept over Amelia instantly, cataloguing her simple dress and lack of expensive jewelry. She saw not a caregiver, but a threat. "And you must be the new nanny," Caroline said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Adrian, darling, we need to talk. I've just been speaking with Marcus Blackwood on the board. He's terribly concerned. He says you've been distracted lately, leaving meetings early. He's worried this domestic situation is affecting your focus." Marcus Blackwood, Adrian's longtime right-hand man and COO of Ashford Holdings. He was as ruthless and cynical as Adrian had ever been. He viewed emotions as liabilities and people as pawns. Marcus should concern himself with the Sterling Moss integration, Adrian said, coolly, getting to his feet. "This is what he's concerned about," Caroline hissed, gesturing vaguely at Amelia. "Who is this girl? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've brought a complete stranger, a nobody, into your home, into Leo's life. The tabloids would have a field day. Think of the family's reputation. She's a gold digger, Adrian. It's as plain as day. She's playing you." Amelia, who had been quietly trying to shield Leo from the venomous conversation, stood up. "Mrs. Davenport," she said, her voice firm but respectful, "I think it would be best if we continued this conversation away from Leo." Caroline scoffed. "Oh, the help has an opinion now, does it?" The accusation, the raw, ugly snobbery of it, hit Adrian with the force of a physical blow. He looked at his sister, at her perfectly manicured, grasping hands, and he saw the greedy, empty world he was trying to escape. Then he looked at Amelia, standing tall and dignified, her primary concern being the well-being of his son. The battle lines were drawn not in a boardroom, but in his own living room. He had thought the only challenge was the one within his own heart. Now he realized the world he had built and the people who populated it would not let him change without a fight. His decision to hire Amelia was about to have consequences that rippled far beyond the walls of his penthouse, threatening the very foundations of his empire. Caroline's venomous visit was merely the opening salvo. The real assault came from Marcus Blackwood. Marcus was a man carved from the same cold granite as the old Adrian Ashford. He had been Adrian's bulldog for 15 years, the architect of his most ruthless takeovers. He believed in a simple creed: trust no one, exploit every weakness. He saw Amelia not as a person, but as a dangerous variable that threatened the stability of the Ashford Empire, an empire he had helped build and from which he handsomely profited. He saw Adrian's changing priorities, leaving work early, talking about his son with uncharacteristic warmth, as a terrifying vulnerability. He decided to eliminate the variable. Marcus, like Adrian, had access to the best and most discreet investigators. But unlike Adrian, he wasn't looking for character. He was looking for dirt. And when he couldn't find any, he decided to manufacture it. 2 weeks after Caroline's visit, Marcus requested an urgent private meeting with Adrian. He arrived at the penthouse office looking grave, a leather-bound folder in his hand. "Adrian, we need to talk." He began, his voice low and serious. "I did some digging on your new caregiver. For your own protection, for Leo's protection. I think you need to see what I found." He opened the folder on Adrian's obsidian desk. Inside were photographs. The first few showed Amelia in conversation with a rough looking man on a street corner. The man was a known bookie with minor mob connections. In one photo, it looked as if she was passing him an envelope. The next set of documents were forged bank statements showing large unexplained cash deposits into an account under a different name linked back to Amelia. Finally, there was a signed affidavit from a man claiming to be a former Sea Orca stating that Amelia had been fired from a previous job for skimming cash from the register. Her name isn't even really Vance. Marcus said, his voice laced with feigned regret. It's Vancini. Her father had ties to some very unsavory people before he passed. It seems she's picked up where he left off. She's likely in debt to these people. She's a grifter, Adrian, a professional. She saw you and Leo in that diner and played you like a violin. Every word was a perfectly crafted missile designed to hit Adrian's old-world cynicism, his deep-seated mistrust. And for a horrifying moment, it worked. The old Adrian the Predator resurfaced. The man who believed everyone had an angle, who trusted no one, looked at the evidence and felt a cold, familiar rage. He felt like a fool. The warmth he had started to feel for Amelia curdled into the bitter taste of betrayal. He didn't fire her on the spot. He was too controlled for that. But a wall of ice slammed down between them. When he came home that evening, his responses to her cheerful greeting were monosyllabic. He avoided her gaze. He stopped lingering to watch her with Leo. The laughter in the penthouse died, replaced by a tense, oppressive silence that Leo felt most acutely. Amelia was bewildered and hurt. She knew something was terribly wrong. After 2 days of this chilling treatment, she couldn't bear it any longer. She waited until Leo was asleep, and then approached Adrian in his study. "Adrian," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "What have I done? Please just talk to me." Adrian finally looked at her, his eyes as cold and hard as steel. "The game is up, Amelia, or should I say, Ms. Vancini?" The name meant nothing to her. She just looked at him confused. "What are you talking about? I know everything," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The bookies, the secret bank accounts, the theft. I have to hand it to you. It was a masterful performance. You had me completely fooled." As he spoke, Amelia's confusion morphed into dawning horror and then into a crystalline, righteous anger. She wasn't a crier or a screamer. Her strength was quieter, but no less formidable. "You think I'm a thief?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "You think I'm some kind of criminal? After everything, after all this time, you think that little of me. I have proof." He shot back, gesturing vaguely towards his desk where the folder lay. "I don't care what proof you think you have," she said, her chin high. The tremor was gone, replaced by steel. "I know who I am, and I thought you were starting to see it too. I was wrong." She took a deep breath. "I can't work for you, Adrian. I can't be in a home where there is this kind of poison, this lack of trust. It isn't good for me, and it certainly isn't good for Leo. I'll pack my things." She didn't beg. She didn't plead. Her dignity was her shield and her sword, and it was more powerful than any accusation he could level. The sight of her quiet, unbreakable integrity caused the first real doubt to pierce through his anger. But the true catalyst was Leo. The walls in the penthouse were thick, but the emotional tension was thick enough to seep through concrete. Leo, unable to sleep, had wheeled himself quietly into the hallway. He had heard the raised voices. He had heard the word thief. He had heard Amelia say she was leaving. Just as Amelia turned to walk away, Leo wheeled himself into the doorway of the study. Tears were streaming down his face, his small body shaking. "Don't go, Amelia," he cried out, his voice filled with a desperation Adrian had never heard before. "Don't leave me." Both adults froze, turning to look at him. "She's not a thief, Dad," Leo shouted, his voice cracking. "She's the best person I've ever met. She's my friend. She showed me how to draw perspective. And she doesn't get mad when I have a bad day. And she loves me. You never loved me. You just buy me things." The words struck Adrian with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. It was the raw, unvarnished truth of a child, and it shattered his anger, his pride, his carefully constructed defenses. In that moment, he saw with blinding clarity what he was about to lose. Not just a caregiver he had feelings for, but the fragile, newly forged heart of his own son. He was about to make the same mistake he had made after his wife died, choosing his cold, empty fortress over the messy, beautiful reality of love. He looked at the fabricated evidence on his desk, then at the tear-streaked face of his son, and finally at the hurt but resolute expression on Amelia's face. The lie was so obvious, so crude, compared to the truth standing before him. He'd been a fool, not for trusting her, but for doubting her for even a second. Leo, Amelia, wait. He stammered, his composure gone. He strode to his desk, picked up the folder Marcus had given him, and without a second glance, dropped it into the wastebasket. He turned to face his accusers, the two people who mattered most. "I'm sorry," he said the words, feeling inadequate. "I am so, so sorry." He knew an apology wasn't enough. He had to tear down the man who had created this mess. The next morning, Adrian Ashford walked into the headquarters of Ashford Holdings not as a CEO, but as a man on a mission. He bypassed his own office and went straight to Marcus Blackwood's. The confrontation was short and brutal. Adrian didn't shout. He was colder, more precise than that. He laid out Marcus's deception, the forged documents, the paid-off witness. He had his own team, the truly elite investigators, work through the night. They had unraveled Marcus's pathetic little scheme in under 3 hours. The bookie Amelia was seen with was the superintendent of her old building, an elderly man to whom she was giving an envelope containing a thank you card and a gift certificate for his retirement. "You tried to poison my home," Adrian said, his voice lethal. "You tried to hurt my son. You are a liability, Marcus. Your contract is terminated. Be out of this building in 1 hour." Marcus Blackwood, the man who thought he knew Adrian Ashford better than anyone, was left sputtering in the ruins of his career, a casualty of a war he didn't understand. He had bet on Adrian's cynicism, not realizing that it had been replaced by something far more powerful. Adrian severed the ties not just to a toxic partner, but to the toxic man he used to be. The real acquisition was complete. He had finally bought back his own soul. The termination of Marcus Blackwood sent shockwaves through the financial district, but Adrian Ashford barely noticed. His world had shrunk to the size of his penthouse apartment, and the only merger he cared about was the one happening within its walls. He returned home that afternoon to find a packed suitcase standing by the door to Amelia's apartment. His heart plummeted. He found her in the living room with Leo, the two of them reading on the sofa. There was a quietness between them, a fragility that hadn't been there before. He walked over, standing awkwardly before them. "Amelia," he began, the name feeling both intimate and foreign on his tongue. "I know sorry isn't enough. There's no excuse for what I did, for what I thought. It was a failing in me, not you." He took a deep breath, shedding the last remnants of the guarded billionaire. "When my wife Eleanor died, I closed. I thought if I could control everything, my business, my schedule, my emotions, I couldn't be hurt again. I saw Leo's condition as a problem to be managed, not a son to be loved. I saw the world as a transaction. You came into our lives and you didn't transact. You just cared, and it terrified me because it meant I would have to care too. And I was scared I didn't know how." He finally looked her in the eye, his own gaze vulnerable and raw. "The report I commissioned on you, the first one, I read it. I know about the debts you inherited, about the money you send your sister, about the kittens you rescue. I saw the goodness in your life, and instead of just admiring it, I became possessive of it. When Marcus showed me those lies, a part of me, the old broken part, wanted them to be true, because it was easier than admitting how much I had come to admire you, to need you here, for Leo and for me." He paused, the confession hanging in the air. "I'm asking you to stay, not as an employee, but as a part of this family, if you'll have us." Amelia looked at him, and for the first time she saw past the wealth and the power. She saw the grieving husband and the frightened father he had kept hidden. She saw the man who had just dismantled a part of his empire to protect her honor. She saw the good man he was struggling to become. Then she looked at Leo, who was watching them with wide, hopeful eyes. His hand had crept into hers while Adrian was speaking. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, melting the last of the ice. "Well," she said softly, "someone has to make sure this boy doesn't live on a diet of takeout. And someone has to teach his father how to build a Lego castle that doesn't collapse. The relief that washed over Adrian was so profound, it almost buckled his knees. In that moment, the suitcase by the door became just a suitcase, its purpose forgotten. The months that followed were a quiet revolution. The penthouse, once a monument to minimalist wealth, began to accumulate the beautiful clutter of a real home. Leo's artwork was framed and hung on the walls. A ridiculously fluffy cat named Noodle, adopted by Amelia from the shelter, now had free reign of the apartment. Adrian's schedule was no longer sacrosanct. Board meeting was now frequently replaced with physical therapy with Leo or trip to the Natural History Museum. Adrian discovered the simple joy of reading a bedtime story. The pride in watching Leo master a new skill in his therapy sessions. The comfortable silence of sharing a cup of coffee with Amelia on a Sunday morning. Their relationship evolved naturally, built on a foundation of shared affection for Leo and a deep mutual respect. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but something quieter, stronger, and more real. They became a team partners in the project of building a happy life. Inspired by Amelia's innate generosity and his own newfound perspective, Adrian did something the old Adrian would have considered fiscal insanity. He launched the Elena Ashford Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing financial and logistical support to families with disabled children. It wasn't just about writing checks. It was about providing access to the best caregivers, retrofitting homes for accessibility, and creating a community so that no parent or child would feel as isolated as he and Leo had once been. Amelia, having finally been persuaded to let Adrian pay off her old debts, took a leading role in the foundation, her abandoned social work degree finally being put to its intended use. The final scene of their old life, and the first of their new one, took place on a sunny autumn day in Central Park. It was a Saturday, a day Adrian would have once spent chained to his desk. Now he was pushing Leo's wheelchair along the path, Amelia walking beside them, their hands casually intertwined. Leo wasn't in his old chair. He was in a new cutting-edge mobility device, a prototype developed with funding from Ashford Holdings' R&D department. It allowed him to move with greater freedom and even rise to a standing position. He was beaming, chasing fallen leaves that skittered across the pavement in the wind. Adrian stopped watching his son. He saw not a disability, not a problem, not a reflection of his own failures. He saw a joyful, resilient, brilliant boy who was simply his son. He turned his gaze to Amelia, who was watching Leo with a look of pure, unadulterated love. The sunlight caught in her hair, and to Adrian, she was more beautiful than any skyscraper, more valuable than any stock certificate. He had started as a billionaire who saw a waitress carry his son. He thought the decision that followed was about hiring help. He was wrong. The decision was to let kindness into his life. He learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments. The moment a stranger shows you compassion. The moment your son defends you with all his heart. The moment you realize that the greatest fortune you can ever possess is a family, however unexpectedly it may be built. He squeezed Amelia's hand, a silent thank you for carrying not just his son that one rainy afternoon, but for carrying them both out of the cold and into the warmth of a new beginning. And so in the heart of a city that never sleeps, 3 lives were irrevocably changed. Adrian Ashford, the man who had everything discovered. The one thing money could never buy, a love born from true compassion. Amelia found a family in the most unexpected of places, her quiet strength becoming the bedrock of their new beginning. And Leo, he found not just a caregiver, but a confidant and a friend who saw him, not his chair. Their story is a powerful reminder that the greatest fortunes aren't listed on the stock exchange, but are found in the quiet moments of human connection that shine brightest when the world seems darkest. If their journey from a lonely penthouse to a loving home in the middle of Central Park moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder of the good in the world. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story of life's incredible twists and turns. Thank you for watching.